My name's Tony Riddle, husband, father to 4 unschooled kids, barefoot endurance athlete, and I'm an author of a book called Be More Human. My book Be More Human looks to the indigenous cultures of today, natural existence of today versus the urban experience of today, and how we can bring natural norms into our everyday experience so that perhaps we normalize some of those behaviors. There's modalities and practices within the book that help us remain present in the everyday, and how we can bring that into the everyday, because we can't all live in nature, but it doesn't mean we can't live naturally. And for us to live naturally in the everyday experience as it is today in that urbanite experience, it's often perceived as socially extreme. So to get our biological needs met, we need to look to the natural forms of today, natural beings of the world today, and natural places of the world today in order to normalize those behaviors. For me, there's a core theme within the book, which really is around downregulation. So for me, even to get behind a mic now and behind a camera, there's an element of upregulation where I can feel my heart rate increase, my blood pressure perhaps. And is that going to allow me to access my authentic self? And we live in a world that's so fast-paced today that we've normalized this sense of upregulation, which we can link to being the fight and flight response, let's say, which should be an acute response, necessary really for survival. But in order for us to thrive, we need to be in a much more down-regulated, calm space. So a lot of the practices and modalities are about that, about grounding, so how we can interact with nature, have natural experiences. Just getting out into a forest like this today is enough to lower our heart rate and blood pressure. And then we can introduce practices like breathwork, or even being barefoot and really interacting with the earth. And there's lots of information around grounding, but it goes beyond that. Then we've got the microbiome and the influences that has on our overall health, natural killer cells and microbiome, for instance. So very simple practices really. There's a real theme around movement as well, how we interact and move through nature. We have created an indoor generation. We spend 95% of our time indoors, but how do we spend that? And a large part of that is either sedentary or lying down in bed. Again, if we look to the natural norms and look to nature, there are no chairs. So there's this interaction with the ground, and there's certain ground rest positions that help nourish and support our posture that enables us to be grounded and move through this landscape or even the urban landscape. And our foundational movements really are so important, because we have kind of complex movements like walking or running or jumping or carrying or throwing or defending. But let's bring it down to the most common, which is just walking, standing, walking, running. They're quite complex, but they are only as good as our foundational movements. And our foundational movements are what we find on the ground, and they're observed through motor skill milestones of a child when they're growing up. You see it unravel on the ground, but the moment we put them into a chair, we divorce the child, or we have been divorced from those natural movements that again help nourish this amazing physiology that enables us to walk, run, jump, lift, carry, throw, defend. We have an extraordinary capacity to move well, but again, it's only as good as those foundational movements. I also unpack a little around sleep in the book and looking to natural norms for sleep. We kind of have an obsession over reaching 8 hours of sleep a day. But for some, that creates stress and creates upregulation, because, oh my God, I have 4 kids who are unschooled. I don't get 8 hours sleep. It's impossible really with a business and everything else. I'm an endurance athlete, which sometimes means training for 4 to 6 hours a day, and having a business and having kids, and to find 8 hours, a third of that day for sleep. So when I observe indigenous cultures, and there's 3 independent tribes, one study shows that they're only really sleeping to 5.7 to 7.1 hours, and they wake and they sleep and they wake and they sleep all through the night. What's different is the environment of which they sleep. So it's not the amount of hours, it's really the environment we choose to sleep in. So removing things like our device at night with a big blue light, quite bright lights in the home, and try and think about how can I align this with nature again, because we can't all live in nature, but it doesn't mean we can't live naturally. How do I bring nature into my everyday environment? And that would mean playing with lighting, looking at the fabrics within the home, cleaning up the air within the home, trying to make the expression or the environment as organic as we can, because organic experience leads to organic behaviors and being. Equal, so there's a great study comes out of the University of California looking at 3 independent tribes, 3 different geographic locations, and not one of those tribes are asleep for 8 hours. They sleep between 5.7 and 7.1 hours, and they're not suffering from any of the chronic conditions we're led to believe we would receive by not hitting those magical 8 hours. And what they find is they're waking and sleeping all through the night, and it makes sense, because if you had a fire burning, you would need the fire. So, and if there's predators around, you'd also need to be alert. What's interesting is that they're sleep and waking at different times, so there's always someone present in that environment. And this is super helpful for people that, like myself, like as an endurance athlete or has a business or have kids. It removes the stress, but there's other stuff that we need to remove from the everyday environment, the modern environment. And this is where matching or looking at those indigenous cultures or nature as an example, because we can start to see how it works and what to invite in. So the first thing is really air quality, it's light pollution, it's looking at the information we receive in the night. So thinking of those indigenous cultures around a fire, imparting wisdom, storytelling, it's very different to what we might be receiving through our device in our hand that is the world of competition, perhaps, or scarcity. So it's really removing the toxic information, the toxic light, the air quality as well. And so the expression is inorganic consumption will lead to inorganic behaviors and being. So if I can invite as much of that organic understanding into that habitat, being the bedroom, where yes, we might spend a third of our life, how can I make that as organic as possible to get that sense of being an organic being and organic behavior? The fundamentals for me really are interacting with nature, getting back out into a natural habitat. It helps us understand what it is or the frequency that we can operate at. And then when we do go back into the urbanite experience or the modern environment, we can therefore see that, this is an environment where I perhaps get upregulated. What can I be bringing in from this environment? Just simple 20-minute barefoot walk in nature. It could be the park. It's just understanding the more diverse the environment, the more heightened that experience. So woodland, forest versus manicured park, for instance, will give us a better sense of being. Breathwork. Breathwork is so important. This is where I introduced something called LSD. It's like a microdose of LSD, but it means light, slow, deep breathing. It's an inhale through the nose and an exhale out of the nose. Really light and slow and deep, relaxing the belly and the chest. It's around about 4 seconds in as an inhale and 6 seconds out. The reason we extend the exhale is because there's a lowering of heart rate and blood pressure when we extend our exhale. And if you bring that into nature as well, again, we heighten that experience. So we can get downregulated very, very quickly within that environment. Within the modern environment or the home, again, it's looking at how do we shape that environment itself. In my home, we've spent many years doing this, so we've created a habitat where we don't have chairs, we don't have sitting furniture, we live on the ground, so that again helps nourish our posture, our foundational movements, which help then our more complex movements, and helps me specifically as an endurance athlete. I don't find I have to go to a specific flexibility or mobility class because I'm always moving on the ground and always mobile. So that's sleep, looking at sleep, what can we do within that environment, changing lighting. There's a biohack that many of you might have already heard, which is wearing amber glasses if you're on your device. But it's to understand that with your device, there's something else which is like dopamine from typing and swiping, and the amber glasses aren't going to help with that, and dopamine really isn't conducive with sleep. So it's trying to park the device in the evening if you can. And for some, of course, if you're working, that might not be that easy. So then, of course, amber glasses. You can also install lighting now, which is like circadian lighting, which you can switch to amber in the evening, which will dull the lighting, which brings it back to like firelight within the home, which will help the melatonin. And we need melatonin not just for sleep. It's one of the strongest antioxidants in the human body. It also has ties to diabetes and obesity as well. So it's looking to that. How do we really understand the influence of that, and how do we maximize that within the sleep environment? And then looking at the materials, and it depends on your budget. I've worked from students through to billionaires, and to be honest, it doesn't matter where they are on their path. If their fundamental physical social needs aren't met, they are a human in suffering. So the more nature, luckily, I introduce to their lifestyles, the more, I would say, they learn to thrive and are happy in their existence, and then become a successful being rather than just the modern template of what we perceive success to be. And sleep is a real factor within that. So again, depending on the budget, that might mean an organic pillowcase a month or something that you introduce within that environment. But as close as you can get to organic material, that you understand that it's not just what we inhale as in through our nasal airways, but it's also our skin. The skin is one of the largest organs of absorption. So again, more organic expression, the better really for us to absorb. So along with nature immersion and getting out into these forests or the woodland or even the park, it's about opening up as many senses to that experience. So again, we're often have an alert state through our vision because of our screen. So if you can really open up your visual field, that is also associated with downregulation and the parasympathetic state. So the more and more you can open up this field and get it away from being an alert state, the more calm and downregulated we can be, and the more authentic, I would say, we can be in our existence. So when we combine sensory work visually through breath work as well and getting out into nature, it's a real great understanding of reaching or understanding perhaps what your authentic being would be at a natural frequency in a natural habitat. Along with that, we can play with things like hearing and touch. So if you're in an environment, find a favorite tree, even sit underneath the tree, get some breathing going, play with the visual field. You can even close your eyes and just tune into the sounds and the senses and the smells, and just feel what it is to be nature. Because again, we find ourselves protesting, let's say, in the urban streets, the linear grey streets, but how many of us are actually connected to what it is we're trying to save? So I think when we can get out to the environments of which we're trying to save, we make a deeper connection. We make a deeper connection to the fact that we are nature. It's interconnected. We are not separate from it. And so I think it's very important for us to understand that. And part of that journey is to immerse yourself in nature, and not just a walk with your phone out Instagramming, but actually really tuning in and opening your senses fully to the expression of what that is. The question I get is, when did I get into endurance? And I'm not just an endurance athlete, I'm a barefoot endurance athlete. I was born with club feet, so I had braces, a metal bar running across boots, and they would turn the boots and secure them in a position where I guess was what was perceived as appropriately aligned. I was in a ceremony one day and I'd managed to park all of that information about being born with club feet. It was completely forgotten. And then suddenly some boots appeared within the ceremony, and it then led me on this huge cycle of what I see as perhaps trauma work, which has been brought in by, or learning how to work through that process has been through, again, some of the medicines perhaps of what we know indigenous cultures are working with. And it enabled me through that to see where I needed to go and what the journey would be. I've come from a personal training background, Pilates background, barefoot running background, but as a coach, wasn't entirely embodied within the practice. I knew it, but wasn't really immersed in it as in a full embodiment. Through ceremony, there was a very clear message that you have all this amazing understanding, the knowledge, we need to start experiencing more. And I think it's quite a common theme today, is we are information rich but experience poor, and we need more and more information, but we're not necessarily embodying all of that. So once I started embodying it, I found myself with this incredible strength and this understanding of, okay, this is what it's like to get your needs met, this is what it's like to embody practice. Now, what can I do with this? And I started to look at Greta Thunberg at the time, and there was this message of the larger the platform, the more the responsibility. And so through the endurance work, I could see that this is an opportunity to create a platform and express a really important message. And so the first event I did, which was running Land's End to John O'Groats, which was 30 miles a day for 30 consecutive days, completely barefoot, was to raise awareness for the environment and sustainability. The next event was running the Three Peaks, and if anyone's familiar with the Three Peaks, it's three of our highest peaks in the UK. There's Snowdon, there's Scafell Pike, and there's Ben Nevis. And normally you would scale those, but you drive between the mountains, and I decided I would run between them. And again, because it's perceived as socially extreme, it would raise eyebrows, create a platform. And for that, I then started to raise funds and awareness for Survival International. Survival International, a great cause, again, working for Indigenous cultures to help amplify their voices. So there's been the human potential within that work for me, is to find, well, what's Tony's unique potential once his needs are met and he's a thriving human, and then what do I do with that? So it's always the story for me through endurance isn't just about me, it's about personal and planetary health. And through each event, I raise awareness for what I would consider some very, very important causes, really, for helping us reinteract or reconnect with the understanding that we are nature. So for me, Medicine Festival it's just a great experience, really. For, as I say, Medicine Festival is a great experience. It's a great experience for stepping outside what might be those limiting beliefs and behaviours and stepping into something new. It can be challenging for some, you know, but for me as a father to 4 unschooled kids, it's an extraordinary environment for them to immerse in. I think from a parenting perspective, for children to observe adults having a playful act, going into ceremony, making such contact with one another. There's a real communication there that I think unfolds. For them to witness that, it means they get to see their adult population, who they learn their templates through, partying without substance, without alcohol. That's something quite extraordinary. And again, if I look at my own templates growing up, which then formed my adult behaviours, which then led to me having to unravel substance abuse, alcoholism, they were learnt behaviours in a way. I saw that through my adult population. I saw that's what was needed to have this level of experience. And what medicine's doing is proving that's not necessary. We can, once we get together and connect on this deep level, have a profound experience. And I think it's that level of profundity that we are in search of. And I really think this aligns with a rite of passage in a sense. But again, for beautiful observations that can be made through the younger eyes of how it can be for adults that get together without need to feel they need something to numb or to let go of or to deal with those inhibitions. I think it's so important. And for that, I think it's an extraordinary event. Again, so it's a family event, I would say, and I think it's so important to encourage more of this, to have more of this, and the feeling of community within it. And it does really align for me with those natural norms versus what can be biologically extreme going to a festival where it's a lot of booze, a lot of drugs, and I think it's so important to keep something very clean like this. And also just the observation of the theme of having Indigenous cultures here and medicine, and seeing that this is the way again that we've been living for thousands of years, and to give yourself an opportunity to see how that works and to see how perhaps it works in nature.